Welcome back to class.
Stirring, shifting ground, it's just begun. Edges are blurring all
At the last
around,
lecture,
and
I left you with this song.
Feel the flow, hear what's happening, we're what's happening. Don't you know we're the movers and we're the shapers, we're the names in tomorrow's papers, up to us man to show 'em. It's our time.
This is Our Time from the musical Merrily We Roll Along by Stephen Sondheim. Merrily We Roll Along was the sixth collaboration between director Harold Prince and songwriter Stephen Sondheim. When it flopped, after only 2 weeks, the partnership that had revolutionized Broadway ground to a halt. It was a big surprise. Beautiful music, it was a beautiful show, but it wasn't a great story, wasn't a good book.
Up here, a lot up here. It's hot up here.
Sondheim was so discouraged. He considered leaving the theater to write mystery novels. Thank goodness he didn't. He went back to the roots of his work and started again doing experimental ideas. In Playwrights Horizon, 150-seat 42nd Street Theater, he created this new work by putting it together. This is Sunday in the Park with George. And this is how even producers put it together.
It has to come to light. I put the names of my contributors on the side of each machine.
Some very impressive people.
Well, we must speak further. My family has a foundation, and we're always looking for new projects.
Bit by bit, putting it together.
Family is all you
Piece
have.
by piece. Only way to make a work of art. Every moment makes a contribution. Every little detail plays a part. Having division's no solution. Everything depends on execution. Putting it together. That's what counts.
Actually, the board of the foundation is meeting next week.
Ounce by ounce. Putting it together.
You'll come to lunch.
Small amounts. Adding up to make a work of art. First of all, you need
Now that's a producer's
foundation.
song.
Otherwise, it's risky from the start.
Drawing inspiration from an impressionistic painting by Seurat, Stephen Sondheim juxtaposed the life of 19th century painter Georges Seurat with that of his great-grandson, Georges, a modern conceptual artist. Sunday in the Park, it was this very intense, very personal show about the painter Georges Seurat. It was a passion for his art. At the same time, it really was a Broadway musical about how art is actually created and how a musical is created. It was first presented as a workshop at Playwrights Horizon, as I mentioned. Then the show transferred to Broadway before the second act was even fully developed. That whole Sunday process was just like watching a painting come together, particularly that painting, because Georges Seurat's technique was dot by dot by dot. He didn't just stroke. So that painting, dot by dot by dot, as each song came in, as each lyric came in, the picture became more focused and storytelling clearer, and it literally didn't come together until the day or two before the critics arrived. Coloring Light has to show George's intense concentration, his trance-like obsessive concentration, to which accounts for the basic theme, which you hear all through Sunday in the Park, which is just dot, 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 which represents how Georges Seurat painted. This is Color and Light.
Beer. Color and light. There's only color and light. Yellow and white. Just blue and yellow and white. Look at the iris. See what I mean. No, look over there, miss. That's done with green. And joined with orange.
Nothing seems to fit me right. Unless I wear the more comfortable I feel. More rouge. George is very special. Maybe I'm just not special enough for him. If my legs were longer, if my bust was smaller, if my hands were graceful, if my waist was thinner, if my hips were flatter, if my voice was warm, if I could concentrate, I'd be in the follies, I'd be in the cabaret. Woo! Gentlemen in salsa hats,
The mix between a person who's in real life and a person who is completely focused on the art is the subject of that song, Color and Light. So George is totally focused on painting, and his girlfriend keeps trying to think, why can't I get his attention? The painter had to do that over and over and over and over again. And when he's all done, he's got a square inch of canvas done. And then he's got to do another square inch. Now that he's finished the hat, now he's got to do another hat, you realize. And that's, of course, the way everybody who makes art does it. In small pieces that build together to make something great. Sondheim defines success entirely artistically and with his own vision. I don't think anyone else enters into it. For him, it makes it tough, I think, for his commercial producers, because they sometimes define success a little differently, like maybe with some money.
Page or canvas, his favorite. So many possibilities.
What Sondheim has, actually, is an avant-garde sensibility. In a popular art form, like a script, we start to see musicals about pointillism and the making of art. The musical has gone away from its original popular roots, and I think that is the strength, but it's also the weakness of Sondheim. Sunday in the Park keeps layering on elements that seem to be pointillistic. They seemed self-contained anecdotes, and gradually they all fit and they all come together in the first act to form a complete picture at the same time that the Seurat masterpiece of Sunday in the Park comes together as a painting. Stephen Sondheim right now is basically the history of musical theater. I mean, he's that important. And people inside the theater, people who know theater, people who appreciate it, know that it's why, in spite of the show not necessarily always making money, there's always a line being formed to produce these shows, because there's something fulfilling about working with really, truly great art, even if it isn't always commercial. Now, moving from Sondheim to Jerry Herman, where he's an artist too, but in a completely different way. When Jerry Herman won the Tony for La Cage aux Folles, it was a validation for the most successful composer of the 1960s. And his traditional style of songwriting, as he said in his acceptance speech at the Tony Awards, this award forever shatters a myth about the musical theater. There's been a rumor around for a couple of years that the simple, humble show tune was no longer welcome on Broadway. Well, it's still alive and well, and it's still at the Palace.
We are what we are, and what we are is an illusion. We love how it feels, putting on heels, causing confusion. We face life though it's sometimes sweet and sometimes bitter face.
mastery of old-fashioned fun and flamboyance to the glitzy French drag club where La Cage aux Folles was set. When the producer, James Nederlander, went to Jerry Herman's apartment to listen to the score, he agreed immediately to produce the show. He thought it was one of the best scores ever written. It was adapted from a French film called La Cage aux Folles. It had a conventional musical comedy structure, but there was nothing conventional about its romantic couple. It is all about love, and this was a couple that had been together for 20-something years. This was the real, loving, married couple. They just didn't quite come in the form that everyone expected it back then.
Though the years may so long, I still think of our song on this earth. And I still try and search for the words I can barely remember. Though the time tumbles by, there is one thing that I am forever certain of. I hear la 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 la. And I'm young and in love.
This is the romance everyone dreams of. When the crew and the cast were previewing the show in Boston, the crew was very, very nervous about the subject matter, and one of them said to Harvey Fierstein and Arthur Lawrence, who were huddled together in the last row of the theater, he said, we're crazy. We're opening a show about transvestites in the city of Boston. We're really, really crazy. But La Cage presented the audience for the first time on the Broadway stage that two men sang a love song to each other, and people loved it. They loved it. In the beginning, when all these guys in drag came out on stage, the men who'd been dragged to see it by their wives covered their faces. But by the end of the show, they were standing up and cheering for two men dancing off into the sunset. I think that's quite an accomplishment. Gay sensibility was always in the theater, but whether LGBTQIA got seen by larger groups of people or not, now that is the difference. And this is America, and unless you can make money, it don't count, right? So, like La Cage, it was hardly the first gay musical, and LGBTQIA folks had always appeared on Broadway, but the first game changer was that years ago, it only took money to make it count. And in this situation, you had a topic that was very, very crucial, and it also was able to make money. It was also commercial. I think it was a groundbreaking show, and I think it would have been more successful had it not run into the time frame. The late 80s into the 90s was AIDS and HIV. And at that time, HIV and AIDS paved a devastating swath through the talent pool and my own circle of friends on Broadway. Notable Broadway geniuses were cut short by HIV and AIDS, and those people included Michael Bennett and Ron Feld. Those are people who immediately come to mind. So many people that worked on Broadway during my time are gone. We lost an entire generation of musical theater. We lost an entire generation. We lost the children who might have been. We also lost our youth. Everybody got very much more cynical. And now, as we're looking at COVID, I don't think anybody who went through the AIDS crisis sees it quite the same way. You start to think of the people who might have become famous, like a dancer like Tim Scott, who was just a brilliant supporting performer, like Renee Clemente. These are not great names. These are people who were gypsies, who were in the background, but were so phenomenally talented. Oh my God. What the Broadway theater lost because they died. But so many people just from the ranks, not even just the stars. The thing about AIDS is it didn't just get the generals and went after the privates. It got the guys in the trenches in response to the AIDS crisis. The company of La Cage aux Folles and others from the Broadway community created Broadway Cares. It's Equity Fights AIDS. Equity is the actors' union. So Broadway Cares, Equity Fights AIDS, which has raised over $65 million to help people suffering from the disease.
Life's not worth a damn till you can say, hey world, I am what I am. I am what I am. I don't want praise. I don't want pity. I bang my own drums. Some think it's noise. I think it's pretty, and so what if I love each feather and each spangle? Why not try to see things from a different angle? Your life is a sham till you can shout out loud, I am what I am. I am what I am, and what I am.
The recent corporate influence on Broadway is often attributed to the success of the Walt Disney Company. But before the Broadway musical was resurrected by Disney, Disney was resurrected by the Broadway musical. Here's one I think you'll probably know from your own childhood.
Yes, you go beyond the place. What no, under the sea, under the sea. Nobody beat us, fry us, and eat us in fricassee. We want the land folks love to cook. Under the sea, we have to hook up. We got no trouble. Playing with the bubbles under the sea. Under the sea. Since life is sweet here, we got to be here naturally. Even the sturgeon and the ray, they get the air to start to play. We got to hear it, you got to hear it under the sea. The new play the flute, the cop play the harp, the bass play the bass, and the sound and sharp, the bass play the brass, the chop play the top. The flute is the Duke of Soul.
After more than a decade of lackluster films, Disney had a string of hit animated musicals, many written by Broadway veterans and informed by Broadway storytelling. But producing a live musical on Broadway seemed a little beyond the limits of even Disney magic. It can be very, very hard.
In the heart of little old New York, you'll find a thoroughfare. It's the part of little old New York that runs into Times Square. A crazy queer.
Just dealing in New York was hard, and you know, they're ducking bullets in the 70s and garbage trucks, and it was just, forget it. Let's just go and make movies and not have to deal with how difficult New York City is. That kind of kept people resisting until Disney made the movie Beauty and the Beast. I think Frank Rich reviewed it as the best musical in New York, even though it was an animated film at the time. There was a movie that got us thinking, and when we decided, let's give it a shot. And the whole thing kind of fit together in a Disney-esque way since it's been 10 years. Pretty good. Disney's success was Beauty and the Beast. It spurred an unexpected transformation on 42nd Street itself. It began with Michael Eisner when he visited the New Amsterdam Theater. And it used to be the former crown jewel, as we mentioned before, of Lorenz Ziegfeld's kingdom. Somebody called me and said, hey, you want to come see the theater? Well, at that point, this is me. I ran a small company, IRT, down in the Village. And they were trying to raise interest in saving the place, so they invited anybody who had a theater. So I said, yeah, why not? And I remember that day, it was dark, it was raining in the theater, birds were flying around. but you could see what it was. New York City wanted to bring Disney's wholesome image to the sleaziest playground they had. But Disney wanted assurance from Mayor Rudolph Giuliani at the time that the neighborhood would be safe for families. The producer and the group, all of them, were concerned about the adjacent nightlife, and Giuliani said, "They'll be gone." Someone said, "Well, Mr. Mayor, you know, there's the American Civil Liberties Union. I mean, you just think they're going to leave?" And Giuliani gave the guy this look and said, "Yeah, they'll be gone." And I remember feeling a little scared instead of a little assured. But this is what came out of it. The New Amsterdam was magnificently restored, and for the first time in 75 years, major corporations became interested in 42nd Street and Times Square. If you ask anybody walking down the street, who's the star of Broadway, anybody in the theater is going to say Michael Eisner, because he brought 42nd Street back. The star now is not Florence Ziegfeld, not the impresario, not Al Jolson, the big star. The big star now is the corporation. It's taking show business to a new level of what the meaning of the word is. We simply came into that theater, the New Amsterdam. That's it. The articles written about how Disney saved 42nd Street, well, Disney created tourism back in New York. Hotels picked up. It's very flattering to Disney to think that they did it almost single-handedly, but it's pretty much untrue. The show that moved into the refurbished New Amsterdam in the fall of 1997 was The Lion King, an adaptation of Disney's most successful animated film. It featured popular songs by Elton John with lyrics by Tim Rice and a chorus led by South African composer La Boheme. But the real challenge was how to translate the movie's animated characters to the stage. It is a landscape that people don't think can be put on stage. It's the whole animal kingdom. It's an animal parable of life. The first female director to be seen as a true artist, Julie Taymor, felt she needed to make sure she could keep the human beings present. It just was a question in the development of Lion King, a big question in the workshop development, so the audience could see a human face and look at a mask at the same time. The worry was, where will they focus? But in the theater, you can expect more from your audiences. They know they're in a theater. The audience is not spoon-fed absolute reality, but they come so that they can finish the sentences with you. When you work in television, you don't feel a reaction. It's like this Zoom kind of classroom or Zoom performances now that you see on YouTube. 1.2K people saw the show, but they become just numbers, not real people. And back then, they read that 62 million people watched this and 50 million people watched that, but it's empty, it's sterile, it's only half the conversation. You put it out, but you don't know what's coming back. But 1,832 live people in the theater going crazy. Now that is awesome. kind of excitement and applause is kind of hard to muster in this two-dimensional medium. One of the best things about The Lion King is that it's not about race and all about race when white, it's not about race in some situations, and then all about race when white audiences go to see Lion King. When white audiences go, they don't think about it because of their privilege. They get the beauty and the talent of these great performers and the music. But as a black kid going to see the show, in a black audience watching a black show, it's all about race, because imagine a young African-American child going to see a king who's black. It's about a future where racism won't be an issue at all. That is one of the most sacred things to me about theater. You can show the world as it can be and urge the rest of us to catch up to that image and to strive to be its best self. The next show I'll discuss is Rent.
The power blows.
On October 21st, 1995, composer Jonathan Larson quit his job as a waiter at the Moondance Diner, where he had worked for over 9 years. A small off-Broadway theater had committed to produce his new rock opera. New talent can find it almost impossible to come up through the ranks. And Jonathan Larson, he wasn't a kid. He'd spent years trying to get a show on without success. So it's very hard for the next generation of Soundtimes or Kander and Ebbs or Bach and Arnett's to come along. Larson had grown up just outside the city and loved Broadway. His dream was to create a new kind of Broadway show that would appeal to a generation raised on rock and roll and MTV. When you read Rent, the first stage direction is that there's a full Broadway orchestra in the pit and there's a rock band on the stage. And I always think that perfectly defined who Larson was. He was somebody who was as much a one to be a part of a musical theater tradition as he wanted to just blow it up and change it and reinvent it. They were really developing Rent for the East Village. It's a modern reimagining of La Boheme in the East Village. There was a wonderful marriage between contemporary music and storytelling, the likes of which the musical theater hadn't seen for a while and the opera hadn't seen for a while. And he was working from a very urgent place. He was working through a number of his friends becoming ill with HIV and AIDS. And what's absolutely best and most meaningful about Rent is the stuff that's closest to Jonathan's heart and his stuff that is closest to the material, which was about him dealing with a lot of his friends' deaths from AIDS.
One song, glory. One song before I go, glory. One song to leave behind. Find one song, one last refrain, glory. From the pretty boy front man who wasted opportunity. One song, the world at his feet, glory in the eyes of a young girl. A young girl. Find glory beyond the cheap colored lights. One song before the sun sets, glory on another empty life. Time flies, time dies. Glory. One blaze of glory.
During the exhausting technical rehearsals for Rent, Jonathan Larson was admitted to the hospital twice with flu-like symptoms. The night before the first preview, he suddenly died. Not of AIDS, but of an undiagnosed heart problem. He was 35 years old.
Glory in a song that rings true, truth like a blazing fire, an eternal flame. Find one song, a song about love, glory from the soul of a young man, a young
what happened in those days following his death is that he became a part of the musical itself, of Rent, and of course those issues in the musical about loss and finding a way through, about loss pounding in your ears and beating in your chest. And we all sort of took a lesson from the musical about how to move forward and how to take care of ourselves. The success of Rent off-Broadway prompted a move to the Nederlander Theater, where it was played over 3,000 performances. And of course, now we know it became a movie, and 30 years later, it's still one of the most popular musicals of this generation as well. But it's actually about surviving great loss and great devastation. And I really love, with the sentiment of being able to measure our time here and our successes here by how much love we put out and how much love comes back to us.
525,000 moments so dear, 525,600 minutes. How do you measure it here? In daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee, in inches, in miles, and laughter and strife. In 525,600 minutes.